Well, good evening. This is Piers Morgan, Uncensored. Breaking news in the last few minutes. Ghislaine Maxwell, the former girlfriend of billionaire paedophile Jeffrey Epstein, has been sentenced to 20 years in a US prison for helping Epstein abuse 4 teenage girls. Incredibly, just before the sentencing was announced, Maxwell stood up in court and played the victim herself. She said, "I empathise deeply with all of the victims in this case. I acknowledge that I have been a victim of helping Jeffrey Epstein commit these crimes." An extraordinary thing to say. Well, just before the sentencing, damning impact statements were read out, including from Virginia Giuffre, who's become one of the most well-known accusers of Jeffrey Epstein after settling a sexual assault case against Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, who denies her claims. In her statement, Giuffre accused Ghislaine Maxwell of opening the door to hell. Another victim, Sarah Ransom, broke down in tears and said she became, against her will, nothing more than a human sex toy with a heartbeat and soul for the entertainment of Epstein, Maxwell and others, and was subjected to sexual predation multiple times per day. She spoke out on her way into court.
I spent the last 17 years in my own prison for what she, Jeffrey, and all the co-conspirators did to me. I was raped repeatedly. I was raped 3 times a day sometimes. And I was not very visible on that island. There was a constant stream of girls being raped over and over and over again. And yes, Ghislaine must die.
Well, joining me now live from the courthouse in Lower Manhattan, New York, is Julia Jenae from Court TV. Julia, a 20-year sentence for Ghislaine Maxwell. Already some victims coming out saying this is way too lenient. It could have been a lot more, but the judge gave an indication before passing sentence that it was going to be in that 15 to 20 range. What is your reaction to this?
No, Piers, we did know what the federal sentencing guidelines were going to be because the judge decided that before a short break. She believed it was going to be around 17 to 21. But putting it into perspective, these prosecutors were asking for 30 years to 55 years. So to hear that this number is 20 years, you can understand how those survivors would react to hearing it being so low compared to what prosecutors were asking for. But when you look at the guidelines, it does fall within that range around the max of what she could have received under those federal sentencing guidelines. But the judge said herself, she is not bound by those guidelines, and she would have been able to enhance this beyond had she felt that this was warranted. But she did say that she believed that this is something that is not too great of a punishment to go beyond what is necessary, but she said that it is sufficient to punish her for these heinous acts and the pattern behavior that she found so objectionable.
Julia, thank you very much indeed. We're going to go live now to Bobby Sternheim, who is the attorney actually for Ghislaine Maxwell, who's talking outside court right now.
And the issues on appeal.
So I thank you. I thank you. Kevin, you're speaking?
Yes. Get what she said in a moment, just wrapping up there with the reporters outside the court. But what we can tell you, this is what Ghislaine Maxwell said in court before the sentencing was announced. I think it's pretty extraordinary what she said here. She got up and she said, "Your Honour, it's hard for me to address the court after listening to the pain and anguish expressed today. The terrible impact on the lives of so many women is difficult to hear and even more difficult to absorb in its scale and its extent. I want to acknowledge their suffering. I empathise deeply with all of the victims in this case. I acknowledge with that I have been a victim of helping Jeffrey Epstein commit those crimes. His impact upon all those who were close to him has been devastating. Jeffrey Epstein fooled all of those in his orbit. Victims considered him to be a godfather, a mentor, a benefactor, a friend, a lover. It's absolutely unfathomable today to think that was how he was viewed contemporaneously. I'm sorry for the pain that you have experienced. I hope this brings the women who have suffered some measure of peace and faintly to help you put those experiences of so many years ago in a place that allows you to look forward and not back. It's my sincerest wish to all those in this courtroom and all those outside this courtroom that today brings a terrible chapter to an end. May this day help you travel through darkness into the light." Well, I'm joined now. This is the lawyer again, Bobby Stern. Let's see if we can pick this up.
You deserve to uncover it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Heim.
Okay, well, so I want to go now to the criminal defence attorney, Mark Geragos, and Tom Bowers with me, who's a best-selling biographer of Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell, the newspaper publisher and media magnate. Let me start with you, Tom. an extraordinary statement before the sentence was announced by Ghislaine Maxwell, really putting herself as if she was another victim. Nothing to do with me, Gov. I'm with you. In fact, this line here, I acknowledge that I have been a victim of helping Jeffrey Epstein commit those crimes. How can an accomplice be a victim?
Well, it's not only that, but why didn't she say that before the sentence, before the verdict? Why didn't she say it in her own defence? What was remarkable about the trial is that she promised the world she was going to demolish the prosecution and prove her innocence. And when the case came for the defence, it just collapsed. And this just shows she was seeking mitigation, but it's all a phony, it's all rubbish. She knows very well what she did, and she was guilty.
You have no doubt about that?
Absolutely none at all. I think that the evidence was overwhelming, and I think that the only thing she didn't bring into that statement was blaming her father.
Right.
And I think rightly so, because I really think that Bob Maxwell, as we all know, was an unbelievable bully, thief, and a dreadful man in many ways. But the one thing he wasn't was a sexual pervert. And bizarrely, we still don't know why Ghislaine was that accomplice to that perversion, and we know that she's guilty, very guilty.
Mark Geragos, I mean, I suppose one of the reasons she might be continuing to profess her innocence and play the victim is she is appealing. I guess if she made any admissions at this stage, that would obviously wreck her appeal. Will that be the thinking here?
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going to say. You stepped right on it. She's going to appeal, contrary to what your other guest says. She's got a very solid grounds for appeal. I mean, remember, it may have been forgotten, but one of the jurors brought in his own personal experiences and said that his experiences are what tipped the balance during jury deliberations in the favor of guilt. That's clearly something that would be prejudicial. The judge overruled those objections and denied the motion for a new trial, but that she's got a very good and live appeal, even though appeals are always a long shot in the federal system. It makes no sense for her, because, by the way, a 20-year sentence in federal court in America, you're going to do a lot of that time, if not 18 years or something along those lines. That's a substantial sentence, and well within the guidelines, as was indicated by your previous guest, and she's got a viable appeal. So that's clearly the explanation for why she made the statement that way.
Can we read anything, Mark, into the fact that she got the lower end of the spectrum of sentences? It could have been up to 55, 60 years, but the judge made a point of saying it was going to be in a much lower range. Can we read anything into that? Does that indicate that the judge may herself have thought there was perhaps some doubt here?
Well, remember, once again, when it came for that motion for new trial, this judge specifically, and she's going to a higher court, this was her last trial in the district court. She specifically ordered the hearing here. The DOJ, the prosecutors, were the ones who brought it to her attention immediately and asked for a hearing. There's a lot going on here, and clearly, if she had gone way above the guidelines, that would have gotten the attention of the appellate court as well, even though that's not supposed to be the case. So I think there's quite a bit going on here. I would not be so sure that this case does not get overturned. I think there's a sufficient grounds to make a very credible appeal here.
Okay, well, different views from our two panelists here. Let me ask you, Tom, just on a wider issue. It obviously wasn't just Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell committing crimes here. We know that they had a long client list of rich, powerful, apparently some famous people on that list. We don't know who they are. Are we going to find out?
Well, I think we do know who they are. I mean, there'll be lots of gossip, and we won't mention the names here. But the point about it is that, in the essence, and this is where I disagree with your previous guest, that Ghislaine Maxwell undoubtedly for many, many years was looking for girls to groom and to provide for Epstein. And I believe those girls, not because I believe victims per se, but because their evidence was irrefutable.
And there were so
far too
many
many of them. Exactly, far too many. I think about the sentence, there's a life sentence for her. She's 60.
Right.
She'll be 80. I mean, you know, that's near to death. So I think that's why it's 20 years. But I think what's really important here is that Epstein did, as you rightly say, have this huge circle of very, very influential friends, many of whom who saw what was happening and didn't raise the alarm. They must be utterly terrified that Ghislaine will finally do the dirt.
Why hasn't she so far?
Because I think that would be self-incriminating. She doesn't want to say that she was
But
part
couldn't she have
of
done
that.
it? I mean, let me bring in Mark Geragos again. Could she not, Mark, have done a deal? I've seen that many times in these kind of cases in America. If she'd said, look, I'll give you the names of all these rich, powerful people who were involved in this, but I want a much reduced sentence. Would she have got that if she'd played that card?
Look, the federal criminal system is predicated on the idea that they indict somebody or they threaten to indict somebody, and that the person then cooperates and gives you more or says that they're going to give you more regarding somebody else, usually going up the ladder, so to speak. So yes, that was clearly something she could have done. In her defense, I think that she feels like, and her lawyers have argued this all along, that she was being prosecuted by proxy, that in fact, that because they didn't have Epstein, that a number of these things changed. And they made a pretty good case for that during the trial itself. They showed that a number of these witnesses did not say originally, when Epstein was alive, that she was the kind of prime mover of this, that they only changed or came to that recollection after he died. So I think maybe going into it, she had, and I don't have any extraordinary insight into what she was doing, but it would not surprise me that she thought she had a completely, or at least an arguably defensible case, that there was clearly some doubt in that jury deliberation room, because the person who says that he was molested says that his own words, gave an interview and said, I convinced those who were on the fence that this kind of discrepancies that you see in the testimony is something that's standard operating procedure when you're victimized.
Mark Geragos, thank you very much, as always, for your astute analysis of that. We appreciate you joining us. We're going to take a short break. Tom, you stay with me. We're going to be joined also by Lady Victoria Hervey next, who was a close friend of Ghislaine Maxwell. Breaking news tonight, socialite Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to 20 years in jail for child sex trafficking. Well, joining me now is Lady Victoria Hervey, who is in the same social circles as Ghislaine Maxwell, and Robert Maxwell's biographer, Tom Bauer, is still with me. Well, thank you for racing in to talk about this. I mean, you knew Ghislaine Maxwell for a long time. You socialised with her. What do you make of this? I mean, apart from anything else, it's an astonishing fall from grace. But what do you think of the sentence?
It is. I think the sentencing is fairly predictable. I mean, this is what her lawyers did ask for. They asked for 20 years, which is more lenient than what was being requested. But I think she will be obviously not happy, but she's probably happy that it's not more than 20. And I think for good behaviour and things like that, the fact that she's already been in there for a couple of years, that'll all come into play. And I think she'll end up being, it'll be a lot.
Do you have any
sentence.
sympathy for her?
I think, knowing what I do, a little bit, but not so much. Really.
I mean, the theory she wants us to... Well, what she
know.
wants us all to believe, notwithstanding the conviction and everything else, she wants us to believe that Epstein was the monster, that he hoodwinked and conned everybody, as she put it. She conned godfathers, mentors, benefactors, friends, lovers. She was reportedly a lover.
Well, the fact is, he died and she's taken the rap of it. And the fact that if...
It doesn't mean she hasn't deserved it.
No, it doesn't mean that, but it means that the whole focus has always been on Ghislaine because there's no Epstein to blame. So all the girls, everyone, the blame has just completely gone to her. And I think that is unfair in a way. Obviously, she deserves, to be in jail, but the fact that there's no one else to take the blame.
But if she did what she'd
and she will be dead as well. Like, I give it 6 months, she'll have a hit on her in the jail.
Well, certainly after what happened to Epstein.
Just like Epstein.
Well, they'll be very careful, I'm sure, not to let it happen. Tom, you've studied the Maxwells for so long. It's an extraordinary, dramatic roller coaster ride, this family. One of her brothers came out only last week with a very sort of painful interview, as you'd expect from a brother, I guess. There's a pleading for mercy for her and insisting his sister is innocent. Is it possible that she was, like everybody else apparently was with Epstein, conned by this guy?
Absolutely not. She's a product of Balliol College. She's a highly intelligent woman. She knew exactly what she was doing. And all the people I've spoken to who were picked up by her or seduced by her in parks, jumping out of cars, asking them to come. For years on end, she was working for Epstein, and I think the relationship was unbelievably sordid and criminal. And I think Ian, who got away himself, was found not guilty of fraud in a trial which I thought would go the other way, but he was found innocent by... thought that Ghislaine should have the same treatment, that Maxwell's never get convicted. But, you know, the whole point about Ghislaine is her defence was absolutely useless. She put up no defence whatsoever, having promised the public that she was going to defend herself. And most important of all, didn't go into the witness box. That was the most self-incriminating part.
Yeah, and whenever people don't do that, there is always a feeling, well, that they must not want to risk incriminating themselves, right?
Right, yeah.
The Prince Andrew aspect of this. So he has come to this settlement with one of these victims, Virginia Giuffre, to the tune of million. Well, we'll come to you in a moment. I know you'll hear about this.
Are you the guy that wrote the book?
Well, he wrote a book about Robert Maxwell, her father.
Okay.
But you know, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit reported up to $11 million. Having said he was going to clear his name and fight in court, he then caved and gave her a cheque. Where does he now? He's trying to make a comeback in public life that nobody's got much appetite for. How damaging is this conviction, do you think, to his chances of ever returning?
Oh, I think hugely damaging. I think Andrew is finished. I think the public is sick to death of him, and I'm afraid his brother will be have problems too. I think with all the taking millions of euros in cash. So I think that the royal family really needs to bury Andrew. The photograph is absolutely genuine.
Well, that photograph... I mean,
that photo is fake.
Well, Victoria,
just so you know,
Victoria, you say
the photo
this.
is fake. Look at the picture in front of me. Look at it.
You say this, but you don't know that picture.
I know because I'm in touch with the person that took those pictures, and it's not Andrew in the picture, it's Epstein.
I thought...
I've seen the real picture.
Well, if that picture's fake, why didn't he go to court and clear his name?
Because I found the guy that took the pictures after he'd done the settlement.
What's his name?
I'm not telling you. No one knows this yet.
I see.
Who the sorry,
oh, wait,
but
no, sorry,
I'm not going to swear.
I apologise for the language.
Sorry, but I am in touch with the person that took the photo, and interestingly enough, she did meet him in a park. You said about her picking up people in a park, but he is...
Why did Prince Andrew give her $11 million if he's a completely innocent man?
The proof that I had, I was in the middle of digging it all up. And the evidence I had when someone came to me, which to be honest, I thought this guy was nuts. When he first sent me a picture of this famous picture that we're so used to seeing, but it had Epstein's head in it. I looked at it and I thought...
Yeah, but people can muck around with pictures these days. Honestly, I've seen it. It was happening when I was on a newspaper 15 years ago.
I have a signed affidavit with exactly how the story went down, and I've had police visit this guy, and I've had detectives...
So again, why would Andrew then, if that picture's
He'd already paid her. He'd paid her.
But Andrew wasn't even able to really deny that picture was real.
But why didn't you...
Which meant he'd been in that room. He'd been in that house. He'd been on that floor.
Guys, Ghislaine photoshopped it. She's the one that photoshopped it.
So why didn't Andrew fight his case? Why give the woman
he'd already
$11 million?
Her. He'd settled as I was unravelling it. I didn't have the guy that took the pictures when he settled. This happened like a few weeks afterwards.
Right. Tom, the reality is that Andrew paid this cheque, having said he'd clear his name. I agree with you. I think it's very hard to see a way back, particularly given that he hasn't even tried to make any sort of atonement for it, right?
Not only
the real story will always come out.
We've moved on. I don't think that the public has any appetite for Andrew's atonement. I think the royal family has so many problems now. The last thing they need is a resurrection of Andrew. And the most important thing now, I think, is for Andrew to disappear, Ghislaine to disappear, and this story finally reaches an end.
Well, no, because there's so much more to unravel.
Well, we'll see if it unravels. You socialised with Epstein and Ghislaine, right? You've been at dinner parties with them.
Yeah.
So what was the deal with these dinner parties?
What do you mean, what was the deal with these dinner parties?
Who was there? What were they doing? What was the atmosphere?
It's the normal situation that you would see, like in Saint-Tropez, you know, wealthy men with young girls.
Right.
His crowd, you know, who you would see, I don't know.
Well, let's look at live pictures here. There's two of Ghislaine Maxwell's sisters outside the courtroom, and we'll go to them if they do speak to the media waiting there.
Yeah, I remember, like, the
You say a normal thing. I mean, the truth is, we now
look like
know...
models that...
But we now know they were trafficking young girls for abuse.
And then these traffickers became traffickers, didn't they? Like Virginia, she became a
no, these are allegations that have not been substantiated.
We know, she's admitted it on television as being a recruiter.
You have to be very careful about what you say about people who've not been convicted of crimes, right? This is we're not in a court of public opinion right here, when we are, but not where you can make defamatory allegations about people.
I'm repeating things of people
I'm
saying
curious.
this
You were at these dinner parties.
on television.
You say it was like a sort of Saint-Tropez dinner party, but the truth is, it was unbelievably malevolent what was going on.
Yeah.
Ghislaine Maxwell was sourcing these young, sometimes underage girls for the delectation of this paedophile billionaire, Jeffrey Epstein. I'm just curious.
And his
I met her for 5 minutes at a book launch.
What did you think?
I never met Epstein. Oh, she was perfectly charming to me, as you expect from everyone who's met her, as told. I didn't know anything about this side of her life, obviously, and I never met Epstein. But I am curious, what was the hold this guy had on so many rich, famous, powerful people?
Well, it was blackmail. So he enticed them in, and he got blackmail on all of them. So she would record, she would do her own recording. So they would have a situation, get these girls, get them in political characters in situations with girls. Epstein would record it, and Ghislaine would tell the survivor girls I'm in touch with, she would get her own insurance. She called it insurance, and they would have the peepholes of hotels. There was a hotel in Canada. But Epstein was operating in Canada before the US.
But if you were there, if you were one of the girls at these parties, did you ever get introduced into joining in any of the activity or not?
I mean, not that I can remember, no. I didn't sleep with any of his friends.
Right.
Was I there to entice them in? Probably, you know. I had a title, and it was probably respectable having somebody like me there, where the other girls wouldn't feel so nervous. They would think, oh, this girl, Lady Victoria, OK, she's there, so I'm not going to be scared being around these men.
What do you feel now that we know the truth about Epstein?
Yeah.
Put Ghislaine Maxwell to one side for a moment. But now we know what he was like, that he was this disgusting, depraved, predatory paedophile.
Yeah, he's like a serial killer.
What do you feel about that?
Well, I watched all his depositions that he did, the recorded ones, and those are really freaky. It really brings out his character. There's this one video where he completely says, I have no recollection of Virginia, and he makes the guy spell out Virginia as in all the letters and says, what is that? And the guy has to spell out V-I-R. You know what I mean? It's a complete psychopath.
Tom, it's a horrible, heinous crime, both by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Potentially others were involved. We don't know if we're going to find out who they were or what they may have done or what they saw. But when you look at the Maxwell story, you wrote this extraordinary book about Robert Maxwell. Could you ever have imagined that this would happen with Ghislaine?
No, and I knew her, first of all, when she was a very small girl, when I first met Maxwell in 1973, and she was just a tiny little girl, a sweet little girl. I next saw her actually in Saint-Tropez when I was at a party, a British property developers party, and she was pretty sinister by then. I mean, I don't think Robert Maxwell ever imagined. Robert Maxwell was a tyrant, but he bullied her. And undoubtedly she was attracted to Epstein because he was powerful and rich, and she was perverted. I mean, that is, in the end, the truth.
Well, it is the truth, because tonight she's been sentenced to 20 years in prison for helping Jeffrey Epstein traffic and abuse young girls. It's a despicable crime, and she is appealing, and we'll see what happens with that appeal. But if she fails the appeal, she'll probably spend the rest of her life in prison. Thank you both. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Tom, for coming in. Appreciate it.